Probably some of you know that we just returned from vacation. We got to take a trip to Hawaii. Yeah, we were there for quite a few days, a trip to Hawaii, and it was made possible because the majority of the trip was gifted to us. And so we're so thankful for that. What a blessing it was. And the trip was bittersweet for us. At least it was for me. On one hand, obviously it was amazing. We had some incredible experiences as a family. But, on the other hand, there was this realization that as a family, as the four of us, as the family that we've known for the past 19 years, that's going to be changing here soon. Here in about a month, our son Max is going to be heading off to college, and so kind of bittersweet, and it was a great trip though. But we realized things are going to be different moving forward. Things are going to be different for us, and so I don't know, this past school year, as Max has been a senior this past school year and heading into the summer, heading off to college, things have been kind of emotional for us, for me, and for all of us, I think, as we realize this, as the time where Max is heading off to college draws near. In a sense, we're going to be giving up our dearly beloved son, in a sort of way, right? And so as we dive back into our series on the Patriarchs, we're going to be looking at one of the most famous stories in the Old Testament, probably in all of the Scriptures, and for some, one of the most disturbing stories. Because to be honest, this is one of the stories that some people read and hear about, and they don't believe because of this story, because it's very, very disturbing. And so we're gonna look at this. We're gonna look at the sacrifice of Isaac, or the near sacrifice of Isaac. This story is also called the binding of Isaac. Genesis chapter 22, and I just read it, and we're gonna read some of these verses again as we move forward. Incredible passage. As we begin, though, I want to actually turn back to 21, Genesis chapter 21, the first 5 verses I just want to read. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. So finally, we've been waiting for this, right? We've been in this series for quite a while. We've been anticipating this promised son. Just think what Abraham and Sarah had been going through and what they were anticipating. They had been longing, really, really longing and waiting for a long time for this child. And this child meant so much to them. As we've been talking about, this child meant safety and security, and this child meant hope for their future. But as we know, it's much more than that this was the child of blessing. This was the child that God promised to them. This was the child through which they would be blessed, and the entire world would be blessed. All the nations would be blessed through this family. And so this was a big deal to them. Isaac finally arrived. Then we turn the page to the next chapter, chapter 22. And we read, sometime later, God tested Abraham. How much time? How much time? Sometime later. Well, we don't know for sure. But as we'll see, as we continue reading and studying the passage, that Isaac is a bit older now. He's able to talk, he's able to walk, he's able to carry a load of wood upon his back. And so some think maybe he's around 12 years old. He's probably in his teenage years. Some biblical scholars think that he may even be a bit older than a teenager. We're not really sure, but he's older. It was sometime later. Sometime later. God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, here I am. Abraham replied. Here I am. This one phrase, here I am, is the Hebrew word hanini. And it's very, very important in this passage, and we're going to come back to it in a little bit. Here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love. And some translations say, this is your beloved son. Take your beloved son Isaac and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. I'm going to show you where you are to go. This is a very specific spot, a very specific mountain. Now I'm going to show you where to go. Where to go. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him the two of his servants and his son Isaac, and when he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about, a very, very specific place. Here I am. Here I am, Abraham says. Hanini. Take your beloved son and go to this specific mountain. God is testing Abraham. He tested Abraham. And as we've seen throughout this series, Abraham has undergone lots of tests, right? Several tests up to this point. Some tests he'd failed, some tests he'd passed, but this was going to be his most difficult test, right? And this was going to be very, very difficult. Now, why testing? Why testing? Why in the world does God test people? We see it throughout the scriptures. Well, as you probably realize, we don't really grow much in our faith when things are easy, right? Have you ever thought about that? When everything's great, when we're just cruising along in life with not a care in the world, we don't usually grow much in our faith when that is going on. No, we grow when things are tough. We grow when our faith is challenged, when we're wrestling, when we're struggling. We grow when things are difficult, when things are hard. That's when we grow the most in our faith. So tests are teaching moments, and tests are revealing moments. And this test will reveal something about Abraham. It'll reveal something about Abraham to us as we read and study the story, but it reveals something to Abraham to himself. And this test reveals something about God as well. So first, what do we learn about Abraham? Let's keep reading. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him two of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there, and we will worship, and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the two of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father?" "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and the wood are here," Isaac said, "but where's the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the two of them went on together. How could Abraham do something like this? I mean, we have to seriously ask that question. How could he do it? Well, we have to think he had been walking with God, in relationship with God now for 35 years or more. So his trust in God was growing. His confidence in God was growing. So what about you? I want to ask you, how long have you been walking with the Lord? How long have you been in relationship with God? And hopefully you've been in a growing relationship with him, a growing relationship of trust, and you've been gaining knowledge, you've been getting to know him more, and you've been gaining confidence and growing in that confidence and growing in your trust. If you look back over the past year or 2 years or 5 years, hopefully we can say that. Abraham had experienced God's provision, his guidance, his direction. He'd experienced God's protection when they went down to Egypt, when he wasn't supposed to, and when he didn't deserve it. God protected him when he had acted deceitfully and he had lied about Sarah. Abraham had watched God initiate this covenant relationship and walk the path of blood on Abraham's behalf, saying to Abraham, I'm going to keep my end of the covenant, and Abraham, I'm going to keep your end of the covenant as well. I'll walk the path of blood on your behalf. I'm going to be the faithful covenant partner, Abraham. Even though I know you're going to be unfaithful, I'm going to still be faithful to you. That's stories we've looked at here over the last few weeks. Go back and review these stories. Review these stories that we've studied. Abraham had experienced God in such profound ways, right? And he was growing in relational trust. Let me read these verses again. On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." Why would Abraham tell the servants, Isaac and I, we're going to go worship, and then Isaac and I, we're both going to come back? Why would he tell them that if he knew he was going to sacrifice Isaac? Why would he say that? Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father, yes, my son." Abraham replied, "The fire and the wood are here." Isaac said, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abram answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the two of them went on together. We're going to come back to you, and God will provide. This is what Abram is saying to his son and to the servants. And the author of Hebrews in the New Testament actually kind of clues us in to what's going on in Abraham's mind at the time. What is Abraham really thinking? Hebrews 11, verses 17 through 19. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. And so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the dead. Abraham knew that somehow they both would return. They'd both return. He knew that somehow God would take care of him, that God would provide. He knew that maybe even somehow Isaac would be raised from the dead. Abraham had experienced El Shaddai, God Almighty, the all-sufficient one. Abraham had experienced El Olam, the eternal God, the God of the ages. And when Abraham was pleading for Sodom, as we've seen, he came to realize that as the judge of all the earth, God is a just and God is a righteous God. Abraham had been learning all those things. And we've been seeing throughout this series that Abraham was learning that God was completely trustworthy. And yet, why would God ask this? Why in the world would God ask this? I mean, Abraham's got a 3-day journey ahead of him to think about it and to wonder and to question. Sacrifice my son? Is that really what God wants me to do? This is what Abraham would have expected from the former gods, from his former gods that he used to worship. This is what they thought the pagan gods of that day wanted. That's why child sacrifice was so prevalent back in that day, because they thought that by sacrificing a child to the gods, that would appease the gods, that would make the gods happy. They thought that by sacrificing their children to the gods, that would ensure continued protection from the gods, and that would ensure maybe continued fertility down the line. But El Shaddai, El Olam, the one true God, this God that he was starting to get to know and gain confidence and trust in, is this really what he wants? I mean, this had to have been devastating for him, really, if you think about it. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love," Isaac. Some translations say your beloved son, and this is the first time in the Bible that the word love is mentioned. Abraham loved Isaac deeply. And isn't God a God of love? This doesn't look like love. This doesn't even make a lot of sense. It's going to be difficult when Max goes off to college and he's not even going very far away. He's just going less than an hour away. I can't imagine what Abraham was thinking, what Abraham was feeling at this point. I mean, he had to have been distraught, to say the least. This is the God he had come to know and trust. I mean, think about this. God had provided an infertile couple, an elderly couple, a child, just as he promised, miraculously. Wow. What a God, right? Now sacrifice him. So was Abraham confident in God? Was he trusting in God? Or was he struggling? Was he lacking in understanding? I think both. I think both. As much as we come to know God and trust God, I don't think there's ever a complete 100% understanding. We say, we've got God figured out. We know exactly what he's like and exactly who he is. We can't completely understand God and his ways. There's always some mystery involved. And it would have been the same for Abraham. I mean, especially for Abraham, right? Even more so because this was all brand new to him. We have the scriptures. Thank God we have the scriptures, right? Tests are hard, right? Tests are hard, or they wouldn't be tests. Whether Abraham realized it or not, I think the test for him wasn't necessarily, will Abraham give up his son? I think the test was, will Abraham surrender his hopes and his dreams for himself and for his future? He'd left everything behind when God called him. God promised him a son. If he gives up that son, what's in it for him now? What's in it for him now? And if you think about it, all these requests from God up to that point had promises attached to them. God said, Abraham, leave your family, leave your home, and go to the place I'm going to show you, and I'm going to make you great. I'm going to make you into a great family, a great nation. I'm going to provide a child for you. They had promises attached. There was nothing to gain here. Abraham, go sacrifice your child. He had a lot to lose. A lot to lose. Was Abraham's trust really in God or in what God promised? What God would give him? What God would provide? Was his trust really in God or what he would gain through a relationship with God? That's the test. That's the test. And this test revealed something really, really important about Abraham. He was willing to give it all up. To lay his hopes and dreams for himself, for Sarah on the altar. He was willing to surrender, to sacrifice his way for God's way, for the God that he had come to know and love and trust. So, before we move on, we've got a lot more to go in this in the passage, in the story. I'm going to ask the worship team to come up, and we're just going to spend some time right now in prayer and reflection and some singing together. And I just have some questions for you to think about. What does your relationship with God look like? Is it a growing relationship? Are you growing in confidence? Are you growing in trust? Are you growing in your knowledge of God, in knowing him relationally? Are you growing? Maybe you're struggling. How might you be struggling? How might you be wrestling? Are you confused? Maybe you're not fully understanding. Know that it's a relational journey that you're on. It's a relational journey. And when it's hard and when it's confusing and you don't fully understand everything and you don't understand what God is up to, the question is, will you lean in his direction all the more? Will you lean in his direction all the more? Because as we're going to see, that's what he wanted from Abraham. That's what he wanted from Abraham, and that's what he wants from you. That's what he wants from us. Lean in his direction. And here's the ultimate question. Here's the ultimate question that we need to reflect on. What's your motivation for your relationship with God? Why are you in this? Why are we in this? Something really to think about. I mean, this question will reveal something. It actually will reveal a lot about us. What's your motivation? Personal gain? Answered prayers? Safety? Security? Peace? Maybe a hope of heaven someday? Is that your motivation? Inspiration? Knowledge? Or is your motivation God Himself? God Himself. We can learn to surrender what is most dear to us. We can learn to surrender what is most dear to us when we come to a realization that God is ultimately what is dear. That God is ultimately what is most dear. In Him is life, true life, life to the full. Spend some time in prayer, reflection. What's your motivation for your relationship with the Lord? This test revealed something about Abraham, and this test revealed something about God. Let's continue reading. Chapter 22. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham, here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide," and to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." Finally, at long last, a child miraculously provided to them, just as God had promised. Now sacrifice him. And Abraham was willing to do it. And we celebrate that, and we say, wow, what great faith. Does anybody have a problem with that? I mean, that's disturbing, right? We have to ask the question, why in the world would God ask him to kill his child? Seriously? I mean, this is really difficult. What in the world is going on here? What's happening? And first of all, when we picture this story, when we read it, when we study it, this is what we picture, right? We picture, the knife in the air, the arm almost ready to be plunged. Right? And then at the last second, God calls out, "Stop, stop." And wow, what a close call. That was really close. That's not what the text says. When he reached his hand out and just took the knife, he just picked the knife up. This wasn't a close call. He wasn't like almost there and God barely stopped him. Wow, what a close call. And besides, we know that God hates child sacrifice, right? We know that. He makes it really, really clear throughout the scriptures. In just one place we read, "You must not worship the Lord your God in their way, like the pagan nations, because in worshiping their gods, they do all kinds of detestable things the Lord hates. They even burn their sons and daughters in the fire as sacrifices to their gods." God hates child sacrifice. In fact, this is why God punished a lot of the nations. This is one of the reasons, because they practiced child sacrifice. And it was one of the reasons why Israel was punished, because Israel followed right in the footsteps of the pagan nations in practicing child sacrifice. We know this. We obviously have the benefit of the scriptures, right? We have thousands of years of teaching and learning and discovering who God is and what He's like. Abraham didn't have any of this knowledge. God was revealing something new to Abraham about Himself. So why not just tell Abraham, hey, Abraham, by the way, I want you to know that I hate child sacrifice. I would never want you to sacrifice your son. I would never want you to sacrifice your child. I mean, that's something the other gods would want. I'm not a God like that. In fact, let me tell you what I'm like. Why didn't he just tell Abraham that? You see, something is happening here in this story. Something is happening in this passage that we might not totally understand because we're not Jewish. You see, as 21st century Western Christians, we want everything spelled out. You know, we want everything neatly lined up. We want everything to be succinct. We want lists and we want information. We want everything to make sense and to work out, right? We want it all to make sense to us. But Jewish people, they learn through experience. Jewish people learn through pictures. Jewish people learn through object lessons. You see, God was setting up a very, very powerful object lesson, a very, very powerful teaching moment that Abraham would never forget. God did that a lot in the Old Testament. He did that a lot through the prophets especially, providing powerful teaching moments, object lessons, like when he told the prophet Isaiah to act the part of God by marrying a prostitute. And that would teach them a very, very powerful lesson that even though they were unfaithful, God would be faithful to them. Like when he told, the prophet Ezekiel, go ahead and lie on your side. There's all kinds of crazy things he, told Ezekiel to do. Lie on your side. This is going to symbolize something. It's going to symbolize the siege on Jerusalem. We see so many examples of this, these prophetic enactments throughout the Old Testament. We also see this in the life of Jesus. Here, one example, when Jesus chased out the money changers from the temple, Jesus wasn't just reacting in anger. Yes, he was angry, justifiably angry. This was an object lesson. He was teaching them something. He was making a very powerful prophetic point, an object lesson for the people, something they wouldn't forget, something that they could write down later. And this is what God was doing for Abraham, teaching him something, revealing something very, very powerful about himself. And what did Abraham learn? What do we learn? What do we learn about it, God? One of the lessons is really, really clear, and the other lesson is a bit hidden, and we'll get to that. Let's read verse 12 again. Do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know, this is God speaking, now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Now I know, God said. So was this test for Abraham's benefit, or was this test for God's benefit? Have you ever thought about that? Because God says, okay, you were willing, Abraham, so now I know. Did God really not know what Abraham would do? Did he really not know that whether Abraham would follow through or not? Of course he knew. He's God, right? But there's a big difference between, cognitive knowledge, head knowledge, the omniscience of God, the all-knowingness of God. He knows all things. There's difference between that knowledge and experiential knowledge. And I'd never really thought of this before. Of course God knew. He knew what Abraham would do. But remember, what does God desire? God desires a relationship. He wants his people to follow through. He wants his people to act. He desires obedience. God knows, he knows, but he wants to experience the relationship. And so here's an example. If you're married, you may know cognitively that your spouse cares about you. You may know in your head that they love you, but that cognitive knowledge isn't the only thing you desire, right? From your spouse. You don't want to just know it. You want them to act upon it, right? To follow through in concrete ways. You want to experience their love. God is omniscient. He knows all things. He knows if you love him, but it brings him great joy. It brings him great joy when you follow through, when you worship, your obedience, when he experiences your love. He's so different. He's so different from all the other gods. So different from all the other gods. Abraham found that out. Now I know. Now I know, Abraham. I know. I know that you fear me. I know you respect me. I know now. I've experienced, Abraham. I know that you trust me now. Similarly, I think that the main point of the passage is what we're going to talk about now, and it's connected to this relationship here. You see, there's a Jewish literary device called a chiasm, and I was taught about chiasms in college, in graduate school. How many of you ever heard of Jewish Hebrew chiasms? Maybe some of you have. There are many chiasms throughout the Scriptures. Different types of chiasms. It's a literary device used by Jewish authors. And what these Jewish authors of the Scriptures would do, they would hide these chiasms throughout the text so that people would study and dive into the Word, and they would discover. And once again, this is a Jewish way of learning the Scriptures. And so let me just explain, hopefully this makes sense. A chiasm is a device in which there's a sequence of thoughts or ideas that are presented in the text and then repeated again back in reverse order. So the result is kind of like this mirror effect. This mirror effect. And then in the middle of the chiasm is usually where the nugget of truth lies. It's where you find that the main point, what the author is trying to communicate in the midst of this chiasm. And so you can kind of discover some of these chiasms when you recognize, phrases that are similar or similar ideas. And sometimes it's difficult if you don't read Hebrew, but some of them, and even in English, just stand out. You can recognize them. And like I said, there's just chiasms throughout the Scriptures. Some think there are hundreds of them just hidden in there. And, ranging from just short little phrases to entire chapters. And in fact, even entire books of the Bible are structured in the book of Ruth is a chiasm. The entire book of Ruth is a chiasm. So there's a chiasm in Genesis chapter 22 that I want to show you. And I know this is going to be difficult to see, but let's see if we can find it here. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham, here I am," he replied. Here I am, and this phrase is one word in Hebrew. It's hanini. Here I am. Now at the end of the passage here, in verse 11, but the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham, here I am. Here I am. Hanini." There it is. There it is. And so now let's move in. Let's move inward in the passage. Let's keep reading. We come to this. We will worship and then we will come back to you. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac. Is there something similar that we can find? And we see that there is. You see here, he put the wood on his son. And here we see that he put his son on the wood. Move inward in the passage. The two of them went on together. The two of them went on together. In the very middle of the passage is the point. Yes, my son. And you say, what in the world does that mean? Isaac is understanding at this point that something is going on here. Something is up. Something is not quite right about what's happening. Father, he says, Father, Abba. And Abraham replies, yes, my son. And depending on what translation you read, do you know what that is? That's Hanini. That's exactly Hanini. That is, here I am. Here I am. Here I am, my son. And that is the point. That is the point of the passage. Here I am. That is so, so important. Let's talk about that a second. Abraham, as a good and loving father, he's struggling with what he must do. And Isaac, he's an obedient and loving son, and he doesn't even seem to resist his father, right? I mean, he's a teenager. Apparently, he allows his elderly father to bind him and to place him on the altar. He knows something's up. Father, I don't get it, Dad. What's going on, Dad? In his greatest time of need. I don't like what's happening, Dad. I don't understand. Here I am, my son. Here I am. Here I am. I'm with you. I'm with you, my son. I know this is hard. I know this is difficult, but I'm going to meet you. I'm going to meet you in your greatest need, my son. Here I am. Hanini. Here I am. And as many of you probably realize, Abraham in this story is a picture of God the Father. Isaac is a picture of the beloved Son, Jesus. And so ultimately, this is the ultimate prophetic enactment of what would take place on that exact place, that exact mountain, 2,000 years later, that same location in Jerusalem as Jesus was bound, as Jesus was placed, as the wood was placed on Jesus' back. And Jesus became the sacrifice for the sin of humanity. Now, some of you may be thinking, this doesn't make sense. Something's not quite adding up here. I don't know if you're thinking this or not. But if the main point is here I am, I'm with you. You're my beloved son. In the most darkest hour, in your greatest time of need, I am here. Didn't the Father abandon Jesus at the cross? Didn't the Father turn his back on his son during his greatest time of need? Did you ask yourself that question? Didn't Jesus cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me? You see, I'm not sure what you've been taught here. There are different theological perspectives, so some may disagree with me on this, and that's totally okay, but I don't think Jesus was abandoned by the Father. I don't think God turned his back on the Son at all. I don't think you can find that in the Scriptures at all. There's no evidence for that, but you can find lots of passages of Scripture that say, I'm with you always. Never will I leave you nor forsake you. You can even go to the depths. You can go to Hades. Where can I flee from your presence? You can go to the depths of Hades, and I'm still with you. Nothing will separate you from the love of God. Nothing will separate us. But what God can't look upon sin, right? Where does it say that in the Scriptures? Maybe you've been taught that. What about the book of Job? When Satan himself walks into the throne room of God and apparently has a face-to-face conversation with God. What about Adam and Eve? When they sinned, and they were the ones that were running from God and hiding from God, yet God pursued them. God pursued them. What about Jesus? I mean, Jesus ate with sinners. Jesus touched people who were unclean. Jesus, God in the flesh, came face to face with sinful people and never turned his back, never turned away. So when Jesus was crying out, my God, why have you forsaken me? What was happening? What was happening? Once again, this is an incredible prophetic enactment, a very powerful object lesson. You see, when he cried that out, when he cried those words from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? The people there would have known exactly what he was saying. They would have known exactly what he was communicating. They would have known exactly that he was quoting from Psalm chapter 22. They would have known exactly that he was claiming to be the suffering servant that is mentioned in Psalm 22. You see, even in Jesus' death, he was trying to convince people and clue them into the fact that he is the Messiah. So let's turn to Psalm 22. Let's read it. Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from my cries of anguish? My God, I cry out to you day or night, but you do not answer. By night, but I find no rest. Have you ever felt this way? Have you ever felt like that God's forsaking you, that he's abandoned you, he's turned his back on you? You're crying out, you don't hear God. He's not answering you. I think we've all felt like that at times. Yet you are enthroned as the Holy One. You are the one Israel praises. The psalmist decides to continue to praise God, even in the midst of his struggle. In you our ancestors put their trust. They trusted and you delivered them. To you they cried out and were saved. In you they trusted and were not put to shame. But I am a worm, I'm not a man, scorned by everyone, despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. He trusts in the Lord. They say, let the Lord rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. Yet you brought him out of the womb. You made me trust in you, even at my mother's breast. From birth I was cast on you. From my mother's womb you have been my God. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help. Many bulls surround me. Strong bulls of Bashan encircle me. Roaring lions, they tear their prey, open their mouths wide against me. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is turned to wax. It has melted within me. My mouth is dried up like a potsherd. My tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You lay me in the dust of the earth. Dogs surround me. A pack of villains encircles me. They pierce my hands and my feet. All my bones are on display. People stare and gloat over me. This sounds a lot like Jesus, right? They divided my clothes among them. They cast lots for my garment. But you, Lord, do not be far from me. You are my strength. Come quickly to help me. Deliver me from the sword, my precious life, from the power of the dogs. Rescue me from the mouth of the lions. Save me from the horns of the wild oxen. I will declare your name. He continues to praise. I will declare your name to my people in the assembly. I will praise you. You who fear the Lord, praise him. All you descendants of Jacob, honor him, revere him. All you descendants of Israel. And then here's when the psalmist realizes he feels like God has abandoned him. He feels like God has forsaken him and he's turned his back on him. He says, for he has not despised or scorned the suffering of the afflicted one. He has not hidden his face from him. He has listened to his cry for help. From you comes the theme of my praise in the great assembly. Before those who fear you, I will fulfill my vows. The poor will eat and be satisfied. Those who seek the Lord will praise him. May your hearts live forever. All the ends of the earth will remember and turn to the Lord. All the families of the nations will bow down before him. For dominion belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations. All the rich of the earth will feast and worship. All who go down to the dust will kneel before him. Those who cannot keep themselves alive, posterity will serve him. Future generations will be told about the Lord. They will proclaim his righteousness, declaring to a people yet unborn, he has done it. It is finished. It is finished. And Jesus is declaring this on the cross. The psalmist felt like God had abandoned him, that God had turned his back on him in his darkest moments. He realized God did not. God did not hide his face. God did not despise him. God did not turn his back on him. And Jesus realized the same thing. In his darkest hour, in his greatest need, he didn't turn his back on his son. Here I am, Hanini, Hanini. And he won't turn his back on you. God is in control. He has done it. It is finished. God is so very different from the gods of this world. Abraham realized that, discovered that, and we should as well. I mean, these are gods, though, that we tend to give our allegiance to over and over, right? We think these gods are going to fulfill our needs and our desires. But these gods will abandon us every time. These gods will leave us empty and alone every time, but not our God. Not El Shaddai, not El Olam, not the one true God. Here I am. Here I am. Here I am. Worship team can come up again. A few weeks ago, I was out for a run, and I ran by our kids' elementary school, the school they used to go to in elementary, and I ran around the corner, and the playground was gone. It was like demolished. It wasn't there. And then, of course, I started to get overly emotional about it. You know, this was the playground that my kids went to, and all those years. This is the playground that, in second grade when Max was running and he slammed his head into the pole and had to be taken to the emergency room and he had to get stitches. I'm getting all emotional. It's gone, and all that stuff. I know, overly emotional. And then, God spoke to me in that moment and he said, it's torn down, but something better is going to be built in its place. As he goes off to college, and it seems it's going to be so different, and it seems like the family that we've known for the past 19 years, is, I know, overly dramatic, overly emotional. It feels like it's going to be torn down. It feels like we're giving it up. That's just kind of how we feel at times. I feel, I have to trust. I have to trust that God has something better in store. And here's the thing. Even if he doesn't, and even if he doesn't have something better in store for you, even if we have nothing to gain, we have God himself. We have God himself. A relationship with God. A relationship with El Shaddai, El Olam, God Almighty, the God of the ages, the Creator God. We have a relationship with him. And in him is life. Only in him is life. Abundant life. Life to the full. He's a God you can trust. He's a God you can trust. And that's all he's asking of us. Trust me. Put your trust in me. He's a God that you can surrender to. You can surrender your hopes and your dreams, your plans for your future. You can sacrifice all of that. I know that's hard. It's difficult. It's extremely difficult. You can lay it all down, though. You can, because he is a good father. He's a loving father who will never leave you nor forsake you. And so that's the question. Have you put your trust in him? See, you may be struggling at times. Maybe you feel alone. You feel like, God isn't there. He's not answering. Maybe you lack understanding. Where are you, God? It doesn't seem like you're there, God. Maybe life isn't going like you expect it. You can know for sure. You can know for sure that he's there. He's with you. Here I am. Here I am. In your darkest moments, in your greatest time of need, you can know this for sure. Why? How? How can you know this? Because he proved it. He proved it at the cross. Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the two of them went on together. Then Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw the ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, the Lord will provide. And to this day it is said, on that mountain, that specific mountain of the Lord, it will be provided. By grace, Isaac was spared. By grace, Jesus was not. God indeed provided the lamb. And that's what we will celebrate this morning. If you take the bread, this represents his body that was broken for us. And this cup represents his blood that was shed for the forgiveness of sins. You can take and drink.